Hi, my name is Cindy Petty, and I am an instructional coach and virtual teacher at Middletown Elementary. I was asked to share some of my experiences moving from instructional coach to a virtual teacher. So today, what I'd like to share with you are some tips that I have found to be successful for me. And these tips all come from my reflection of my virtual teaching this year. I think that you will find these tips to be helpful because for me, they have promoted a greater sense of classroom community and have fostered and promoted student success. The first tip I'd like to share is PBIS. So typically each year when we sit down with our students gathered around to develop our matrix and expectations for the school year, we have the students right there. And so one of the first challenges I met was, how do I still conduct this, but do so virtually? So the first thing I did with the students is we had to decide what was our matrix going to include. And I found that some of the headers are different from any other year I've ever created a matrix. And that's because it needed to incorporate the virtual world of learning. So you'll see I've included a picture that shows what my students helped create. They felt it was important to have a column that addressed learning with my teacher online and what those expectations would look like and sound like in order for them to be respectful, responsible, and ready to learn. We did the same thing for the second column with learning on my own from home when my teacher's not there, so during their asynchronous work. Also, they wanted to include just a distance learning column. And one of the ones that I hadn't thought about was resource. They realized that some of the expectations for resource, like PE and music, are very different from the expectations that were set for the content areas. One of the other things I did was I used Pear Deck because I wanted the voices of each of my students to be heard in the creation of this matrix. And I found Pear Deck to be an excellent way to do this and to gather all of their thoughts as we worked through each of these columns with respectful, responsible, and ready to learn. After we would work on a column, the next day I would bring that back to class and I would have it in the draft format of our matrix, and the students would review, discuss, and agree before we move to the next column. The creation of this matrix has really been the cornerstone of why I think the virtual instruction has gone so well, because this really helps set the stage from the beginning. In relation to PBIS, once the expectations were set on the matrix, even in a virtual setting, it's been so important for me to reinforce and be very clear about those expectations. So acknowledging and praising when I see expectations, also making sure that I'm using the system we use here at our school, which happens to be compliment cards and compliment tickets for individual students, as well as class. And so the students get very excited about hearing about the positivity, and those expectations have really helped our virtual instruction to roll smoothly here. Something else that's been very important is building relationships with students, and also allowing them to make connections with each other. I really feel like our social emotional curriculum has done a fantastic job of this year, because that's been a protected time of our day where we, from the very beginning, worked on those things. And, I'm always very attentive to what students share about themselves, making notes for myself, because then what I'll do is I will reach out to the student either through email, or if I'm having lunch with them, or through a conversation, or when I'm having a Google Meet with them, and ask them questions or tell about a connection I have to something, and their little faces just light up. And so it has been really important with the virtual teaching to make time for that, and to let them know how I am connected to them and how they can connect with their peers. Something else that's been really important for me and the virtual teachers here to be successful is using our provided resources. By that, I'm talking about HMH and Go Math and FOSS, and using our 5 Ponds Press, just a few examples. But using those resources and working together with my colleagues to work and plan collaboratively. We've accomplished so much more in our mission together than alone. And so I can't speak enough to the importance of using those resources and then together coming up with ways to make those resources work digitally for our virtual students. Once I have the instruction planned, the next thing I layer in is how am I going to engage the students with the resources and materials that I'm using. And so I'll say at the beginning of my experience, I started out simple, and I found that simple worked best. Starting with just a shared Google Doc where my students all had the opportunity to share their thoughts within a shared doc was one of the easiest ways I started, but I have found the easiest way has actually paid off in one of the biggest ways. I use shared Google Docs on a daily basis. They love being able to scroll the document, seeing the thoughts of their peers. They make connections with one another. And so that has been very successful for me. As I feel comfortable with one way of engaging my students, then I'll layer in a new engagement technique. And I'll work sometimes with my ITC or with other teachers with techniques that they're using. But I always remind myself, just use one at a time. I don't need to be using all of them at once because I find that there's also a learning curve for the students. And so just my best bit of advice is layer these in as your students are ready, and then that kind of builds up the bank of engagement techniques. My next tip would be holding students accountable. And through that, there's been a lot of teacher modeling of using Google Classroom or Seesaw to turn in their work. And so I think the accountability is important, and it's going to partner with one of the next things I talk about, which is feedback, because I want students to know that any work they're doing virtually, it matters to me. It matters to me because I know that they're learning the content and they know they're going to get feedback from me about what they've done. And so holding students accountable and then checking in with those if they are having trouble with any type of assignment or getting it turned in. I've offered extra Google Meets with my students and working with them outside of just the synchronous minutes to help them be successful. They love that they realize that everything they do matters greatly to me. Providing feedback. We know that feedback is a highly effective way to promote student growth and learning. And so I've provided feedback through Google Forms. I've provided feedback through Google Slides, through Google Docs, through email, and most recently through Vocaroo, which provides a link for oral feedback. And I try to make sure that the feedback is very specific and very targeted. And then I also offer sometimes like a question that I want them to think about, or a bridge to the next thing that we may be learning about. And the students really look forward to my feedback. So I think that this has been one of the best ways to move students forward in their thinking. And I think that they try their best on assignments because they look forward to getting the feedback from the teacher. Again, they know that their work matters, and they're excited to see what it is I'm going to have to say about their work. Just as important, though, I think it's important to seek feedback. And I seek this feedback both from my students, but also from the parents. Because with virtual teaching, the territory is new, and we're doing new ways of instructing students. And so the students and their parents have a very unique perspective of being on that receiving end of the instruction and the work. And so that feedback is just as important so that I can continue to provide students with the best possible. Communication is very important. And one of the things that I think is key is being proactive. So reaching out to parents and communicating with them and their child before the parents do the opposite. I just think it really sets the stage and lets parents know how much you care about their child and about their success. And then it also lets parents know that you are there for them and that you're willing to do whatever it takes to help their child be successful. So that has been an absolute necessity in this virtual teaching experience. The last tip that I'd like to end with is just taking care of yourself. Every day, my virtual students need me to be at the top of my game. And in order for me to do that, I have to remember that I have to put myself first, and I have to take a break from schoolwork and step away and do things that are meaningful to me. Now, that doesn't mean in my head I don't have ideas swirling about, oh, how could I make that Google slide better? Or, oh, I could have done this with that engagement technique. Or, oh, I wanted to add Pear Deck to those slides. Those are thoughts that now with this virtual teaching experience that are always swirling around in my head. But at the end of the day, I know that I have to remain healthy and I need to remain positive and I need to remain energetic for my kids. And so taking care of myself, I think, is really important. And I would encourage you to do the same.